My name is Evelyn Reed, and for the 70 years I have walked this earth, I have held one belief with the certainty of bedrock that the measure of a person is found in the strength of their hands and the unwavering honesty of their word. My late husband, Robert, and I built not just a family, but a business on that simple, unshakable principle. Reed and Son Concrete wasn't merely a logo painted on the door of a dusty truck. It was a solemn promise we etched into every foundation we poured, every driveway we meticulously smoothed, and every sidewalk that would come to bear the weight of future generations. Robert used to say that concrete, like a person's character, reveals its true quality under pressure. Our legacy was one of substance, of creating things that were engineered and intended to last. I suppose that is why the encroaching void in my son's new life feels like a profound betrayal, not just to me, but to the very ground he so proudly stands upon. The journey to his home in Westwood Heights has, over the past few years, begun to feel like a slow crossing into a foreign country, a land where the meticulously planned landscapes seem entirely devoid of soul or history. The November light, thin and fragile as old parchment, would wash over the endless rows of identical, oversized houses. Each home boasted a perfect, unnaturally green lawn that looked as though it had never felt the joyous impress of a child's bare feet. My own home, nestled in the steadfast heart of Cleveland, wore its age and its stories with a quiet dignity. Its oak floors were worn smooth in the pathways between rooms, polished by the ceaseless motion of my children's lives, and its walls still held the faint, sweet, comforting scent of Robert's pipe tobacco, a gentle ghost I had no intention of ever exorcising. His house, my son Daniel's house, smelled only of fresh, chemical-laden paint and the cloying, aggressive vanilla scent of the expensive candles his wife, Chloe, kept burning in every room. It was the sterile scent of a place without memories. On this particular Saturday, I had brought with me a gift for my son. It sat beside me on the passenger seat, its weight a solid, reassuring presence inside its rugged plastic case. It was a DeWalt 60-volt rotary hammer drill, a magnificent piece of machinery. I knew its specifications by heart. Having studied them for weeks, I knew the formidable power of its brushless motor, the satisfying, balanced heft of it in your hands, the way its very design spoke of durability and purpose. It was a tool for a builder, a creator, a man who understood the profound satisfaction of shaping the physical world. In my mind, I had pictured the look on Daniel's face, a flicker of the earnest young man I had once taught to mix his first small batch of concrete in a wheelbarrow. The wide-eyed boy who used to watch his father work with a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. That boy, I had begun to fear, was becoming a stranger to me, a man I was starting to no longer recognize. When Daniel opened the door, his welcoming smile was genuine, a brief and beautiful flash of the sun before the inevitable clouds rolled in. But then, as always, Chloe emerged from the shadows of the hallway behind him, a gliding vision of curated, effortless perfection. Her smile was a beautiful, lacquered thing, as flawless and chillingly impersonal as the enormous, abstract art piece that dominated their living room wall. She moved forward, not to offer a hug or a warm greeting, but to assess me, her calculating eyes flicking over my practical winter coat and my sensible, comfortable shoes. Her own impossibly thin frame was draped in a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal, an attire utterly unsuited for anything other than sitting perfectly still. When Daniel finally unwrapped the gift, and his eyes did light up, just for a precious moment, a spark of genuine delight. He lifted the heavy tool from its case and ran a hand over the sturdy yellow casing, an instinctive gesture of familiarity, of deep-seated respect. I remembered Robert giving him his first hammer, a small, perfectly weighted tool for a 10-year-old's hand. A tool is an extension of your character. Son, Robert had told him, treat it with respect, use it for honest work, and it will never fail you. In that moment, seeing Daniel hold the drill, I saw a flicker of that 10-year-old boy. Wow. Mom, this is this is serious hardware, he said, the old, familiar enthusiasm bubbling up in his voice. But the moment was fleeting. Chloe placed a delicate, slender hand on his forearm, her long, crimson-painted fingernails a stark, almost violent contrast to the rugged, powerful tool. "Oh, darling," she cooed, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble. "That's very thoughtful of your mother, but where would we even put something so industrial?" She didn't even glance at the drill itself. Her gaze was fixed on the pristine, empty wall of their garage, visible through the kitchen door, as if the mere presence of such a useful object was an affront to her carefully designed, minimalist aesthetic. The light in Daniel's eyes, once so bright, dimmed and then extinguished completely, replaced by a familiar, resigned look that I had come to know and dread. He quietly closed the case, the confident click of the latches echoing with a terrible finality in the sudden silence. The rest of the visit was a painful blur of polite, meaningless conversation, a carefully choreographed dance around the unwieldy, unspoken truth that now sat between us like a block of cold, unmixed concrete. My world was built from tangible things, and theirs was being constructed from appearances. A few days later, that unspoken truth was given a name and a price tag. I was sitting in Robert's old, worn leather armchair, the one place in the house that still felt like a shared space. I was scrolling through my tablet, a habit I had picked up to keep track of my grandchildren's lives through the strange, detached lens of social media. And then I saw it. It was a post from Chloe, a professionally lit photograph of her slender wrist, now adorned with a new, ostentatiously sparkling watch. It was a Michelle, a brand I recognized instantly from the glossy, unread magazines she left scattered on her glass coffee table. The photograph was accompanied by a caption, "Feeling so blessed. The best husband knows my style perfectly. He gets me spoiled luxury style." I stared at the intricate design, the shimmering mother of pearl face, the tiny winking diamonds that encircled it. I didn't need to be a jeweler to understand its value. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. With a sense of clinical detachment, as if I were reviewing a suspicious invoice for a job site, I opened a new browser tab and searched for the watch model. The result appeared instantly. My breath caught in my chest. The price of that glittering, useless trinket was almost identical, to the very dollar, to the professional grade, legacy-filled tool I had bought for my son. In that moment, the transaction became brutally clear. They had returned my gift a piece of his heritage, a symbol of his father's life's work, and had exchanged its practical, enduring power for a glittering symbol of their shallow aspirations. The betrayal wasn't a loud, crashing wave of anger. It was a quiet, chilling, mathematical certainty that told me everything I ever needed to know about my place in their new world. The feeling of that discovery did not fade. It lingered for the next several days, a low, constant hum of profound disappointment that resonated beneath the surface of my daily life. It was a deep, internal coldness that had nothing whatsoever to do with the approaching Ohio winter, which was now beginning to assert its authority with a biting wind that rattled the old window frames of my house. I found myself spending more and more time in Robert's study, the one room that felt like a true sanctuary, an archive of a shared life built with purpose and love. The air in there still held the comforting scent of old blueprints and cedar-lined closets, a testament to a life of tangible accomplishments. I would run my fingers over the faded lines of his drawings, the elegant, confident strokes of a man who knew how to create things that would stand resolute against the relentless tests of time and weather. I wondered, with a deep and aching sadness, what he would have made of this new, fragile world his son was now so desperate and eager to inhabit. Despite the persistent chill in my heart, I found myself holding on to the thought of Christmas with a kind of desperate hope. The holidays had always been our family's steadfast anchor, a sacred time to mend any fences and bridge any distance that had inevitably grown between us over the course of a busy year. It was a tradition steeped in my own mother's recipes and the memory of Robert's booming, infectious laughter. I had already begun my preparations, planning the menu in my mind, imagining the rich scent of roasted turkey and sage stuffing filling every corner of my warm home. I envisioned Daniel and my precious grandchildren gathered around the familiar dining table, the one Robert had built with his own hands from reclaimed oak. And for a little while, I foolishly allowed myself to believe that these deep-rooted bonds of family were surely stronger than any glittering watch or hollow social aspiration. The phone call that shattered this fragile hope came on a Tuesday evening. The sky outside had deepened to the color of bruised slate, and a cold, persistent rain was beginning to tap a mournful rhythm against the dark window panes. I saw Daniel's name flash on the caller ID, and I answered with a warmth I had to consciously manufacture. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my voice bright. There was a telling pause on the other end of the line, a split second of charged static and palpable hesitation that spoke more loudly than any words could. "Mom, hi," he began, his voice strained and thin, entirely lacking its usual easy confidence. "So, I'm calling about Christmas." I waited, my hand tightening its grip on the old landline receiver. In the faint background noise, I could hear Chloe's faint, directing murmur, the quiet, insidious hiss of a serpent in the garden. And I knew what was coming. "We're going to be hosting this year," he continued, the words sounding clumsy and rehearsed, as if he had practiced them in a mirror. "It's just that Chloe's parents are flying in from the East Coast. And, well, she wants everything to be just right. Perfect. A bit more formal, a real chance to impress her family. I guess." He took a shaky breath, and I could feel the crushing weight of his next words before he even had the courage to speak them. "We were thinking, Mom, that maybe it would be for the best if we celebrated with you on the weekend after Christmas. It would be a lot more relaxed then. You know, just us." "The weekend after?" He delivered the line so casually, as if Christmas were merely an inconvenient appointment on a corporate calendar, one that could be shifted and rescheduled for maximum efficiency and convenience. I said nothing. My silence was a vast, empty space that stretched between us, filled only by the melancholy sound of the rain and the steady, rhythmic beating of my own heart. In that silence, I thought of the 70 Christmases of my life, each one a bright, golden thread in the intricate tapestry of my family's history. I thought of Robert, a man who would have moved heaven and earth to ensure that no person, let alone his own mother, ever felt unwelcome or excluded from his table. And in that moment of devastating clarity, I understood everything. I was not just an inconvenience to their carefully laid plans, I was a fundamental flaw in the perfect, glossy picture they so desperately wanted to present to the world. My work roughened hands, my simple, hearty, unpretentious cooking, my stories of a life spent in honest labor. I was the living, breathing, unwelcome reminder of a past they were actively trying to erase, to sand down and varnish over until it was shiny, new, and utterly unrecognizable. "I understand, Daniel," I said finally, and my voice was so unnervingly calm that it startled even me. It was the voice of a stranger, a voice completely free of pleading or anger or even sadness. It was the voice of a woman who had just accepted a final, immutable, a structural truth. "You do what you feel you need to do. Don't you worry about me." I placed the receiver gently back in its cradle before he could offer any more of his clumsy, hollow, Chloe scripted apologies. I sat there in the encroaching darkness of the study, the house silent around me. I did not weep. The time for tears, I knew, had passed. A different feeling was slowly beginning to settle in its place. A feeling as cold and as hard and as unyielding as the frozen Ohio earth in January. It was the profound, quiet, and terrifying clarity of knowing you have been willingly, consciously given away And in that suffocating silence, I knew that the foundation of my son's comfortable life, a foundation that I had paid for with a lifetime of love, labor, and unending sacrifice, was about to develop a catastrophic crack from which it would never, ever recover. The silence that followed the phone call was a heavy, suffocating blanket. In the days that passed, I moved through my home like a ghost, the echo of my son's capitulation following me from room to room. The cold realization I had felt was still there, a hard kernel deep inside me, but it was surrounded by the persistent, aching grief for the son I felt I was losing. Then, on Thursday morning, my tablet chimed with a new message. It was from Daniel. The words on the screen were a testament to his weakness, a digital portrait of his guilt. Mom, I feel absolutely terrible about how that call went. It's not what I wanted. Can we please get coffee tomorrow morning? Just us. I need to explain. A part of me, the part that will forever be his mother, felt a painful lurch of hope. The phrase just us was a tiny key, promising to unlock a door that I feared was permanently bolted. But another part of me, the part of my mind that Robert had sharpened over 40 years of business, was wary. Hope is a poor foundation for any structure. It is porous and prone to cracking under pressure. I had seen Daniel's good intentions crumble before under the slightest pressure from Chloe. I remembered a time years ago when he had promised to help me repair the stone wall in the backyard, a project he was excited about. The weekend came, and Chloe had booked a surprise wine tasting tour. The wall remained untouched. Still, to refuse his request would be to close the door myself. I decided I would go, not with the open heart of a hopeful mother, but with the cautious eyes of a site inspector. I was no longer there to hope for the best, I was there to assess the damage. I typed back a simple reply. What time? We agreed to meet at a small, quiet coffee shop downtown, a place with worn wooden floors and the rich, comforting aroma of dark roast beans. It was the kind of place Robert and I used to frequent, a place that valued comfort over style. I arrived first, choosing a small table in the corner that gave me a clear view of the entrance. I nursed a black coffee, the bitterness a familiar and grounding sensation. I watched the clock, each tick a small measure of my dwindling patience. When Daniel finally walked in 10 minutes late, he looked tired. The lines of stress around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, and his expensive, fashionable coat seemed to hang on a frame that had somehow diminished. He slid into the chair opposite me, avoiding my gaze, his hands fidgeting with a sugar packet on the table. Mom, I'm so sorry. He began, his voice low and strained. Chloe, she gets ideas in her head about how things should be. Her parents are a lot to handle. She's just so stressed about making a good impression. And He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. He was about to say more, to finally give me the explanation he had promised, when the bell above the door chimed again. My heart sank. Chloe swept in, a gust of cold air and expensive perfume following in her wake. She feigned surprise, her eyes wide with a practiced innocence that was almost insulting. Daniel, Honey and Evelyn fancy seeing you here, she chirped, her voice several notes too high. I was just next door at that little boutique and thought I'd pop in for a latte. It was a lie so transparent it was barely a lie at all. It was a declaration of power. She sat down, placing her $1,000 handbag on the table between us like a territorial marker. Daniel shrank in his seat, his attempt at an apology dissolving before it had ever truly formed. From that moment on, the conversation was hers. She directed it with the skill of a seasoned conductor, never allowing a moment of genuine connection to occur. She talked at me, not to me, her words a barrage of polite, cutting insinuations. We just want you to be able to relax during the holidays. Evelyn, she said, patting my hand with her cold, manicured fingers. We know how overwhelming those big family gatherings can be, especially at your age. All the noise, the cooking, it's a lot. The implication was clear. I was old, frail, and a burden. She continued, her smile never faltering. And it's really not about you being unwelcome. Of course, it's simply a matter of maintaining certain standards. My parents, you know, they're used to a different way of doing things. It's important to Daniel and me that we honor that. There it was, the final, brutal confirmation, delivered with the sweet poison of feigned concern. I was not up to their standard, and my life, my home, the traditions I had built were a source of embarrassment to them. I looked at my son, who sat staring into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. He was a prisoner, and he had willingly handed her the keys to his cell. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply watched the charade play out. My mind a cold, clear chamber of observation. When she finally paused for breath, I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $5 bill, and placed it on the table. For my coffee, I said quietly. I looked at Daniel one last time, a long, searching look that held a universe of disappointment. Then I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving them alone with their victory. The drive home was shrouded in a strange, preternatural calm. The anger and the grief that had been churning within me for days had finally settled, crystallizing not into peace, but into purpose. The meeting at the coffee shop had not been a failure. It had been a resounding success. It had provided the final, irrefutable piece of data I needed. The structural integrity of my relationship with my son was compromised beyond repair. The foundation was corrupt, and in my world, in the world of concrete and steel that Robert and I had built, you do not put a coat of fresh paint on a crumbling foundation. You do not pretend the cracks aren't there. You acknowledge the flaw. You document the damage. And you take decisive action to protect the rest of the structure from collapse. I bypassed the main living area of my house and walked directly to Robert's study. This room was more than just an office. It was my command center, the place where the ghosts of the past gave strength to the present. I sat down in his worn leather chair, the familiar squeak a sound of comfort and resolve. My gaze fell upon a photograph on his desk. It was of the two of us from 20 years ago, standing in front of the new community center we had just finished building. I remembered that project vividly. The client, a wealthy developer, had tried to bully us, threatening to withhold the final payment unless we used cheaper, substandard rebar to cut his costs. I had been worried, but Robert had been resolute. He had calmly gathered every contract, every invoice, every material specification sheet, and met the developer in his high-rise office. "Our name is on this work," Robert had told him, his voice quiet but unyielding. "And our name means more than your money. You will pay us for the work we did as agreed. The developer paid?" That memory, the clarity of Robert's conviction, became my guide. He never raised his voice, but his actions were louder than any shout. With this renewed sense of purpose, I opened my laptop. The screen's cool. Blue light illuminated my face in the dimming afternoon light. The actions that followed were methodical, not emotional. I navigated to my online banking portal, my fingers moving across the keyboard with a steady, practiced rhythm. I entered my password and waited for the main page to load. There it was. Under the section for recurring payments, a line item that had become a monthly source of quiet resentment. $2,500. Monthly transfer to Daniel and Chloe Reed, Wells Fargo Mortgage. Next payment scheduled for December 1st. I clicked on the transaction history. The list that appeared was long, a digital testament to my own foolish generosity. 48 entries. 48 months. 4 full years of subsidizing a lifestyle they now used as a weapon against me. My hand moved to the mouse, and I opened the calculator application on the screen. The click of the virtual buttons was sharp in the quiet room. I typed in the numbers 2,500 multiplied by 48. The result flashed onto the screen in stark, black digits, $120,000. $120,000. And that? I knew was just the beginning. It didn't account for the 50,000 I had given them from my savings for the down payment, the money I'd contributed for the new roof when their old one started leaking, or the countless smaller infusions of cash for emergencies that always seemed to coincide with one of Chloe's luxury shopping sprees. The number on the screen wasn't an emotional tally, it was a clinical assessment of a catastrophic imbalance. I closed the calculator and navigated to the page for managing transfers. I found the line item again and clicked the button next to it. Cancel. A new screen appeared. A final checkpoint. A small box asked, "Are you sure you want to permanently cancel this recurring payment?" I lifted my eyes from the screen and looked at the photograph of Robert once more. I saw the quiet strength in his eyes, the integrity etched into the lines of his face. He would not have tolerated disrespect, and he would not have allowed his life's work to be used to fund his own exclusion. He would have acted. I looked back at the screen, my resolve hardening into something as solid as cured concrete. My finger moved to the trackpad, hovered over the confirmation button for a single, steady heartbeat. And then I clicked, the page refreshed, and a small green notification appeared at the top of the screen. Your recurring payment has been canceled. I closed the laptop. There was no surge of triumph, no rush of vengeful satisfaction. There was only the stark, clean silence of a necessary action completed. I had not found peace. I had declared a quiet war. I had just signed the demolition order for the life my son knew. A life built upon a faulty foundation of disrespect and entitlement. I leaned back in Robert's chair, my hands resting on the worn wooden arms. The storm was coming for them. A storm of their own making. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt no grief and no fear. I felt only the quiet, patient certainty of a builder who has condemned a flawed structure and is now simply waiting for the inevitable collapse. In the days that followed my silent declaration, a new kind of stillness settled over my house. It was not the heavy, grief-laden silence of before, but a clean, purposeful calm, like the atmosphere of a workshop before the day's work begins. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety and resentment that had been my companion for years had vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My thoughts were my own again, not a tangled mess of their needs, their wants, their endless, unspoken demands. I spent an entire afternoon in the greenhouse Robert had built for me, tending to my orchids, feeling the rich, dark soil under my fingernails. It was a simple, grounding act, a reconnection with the tangible world of growth and patience, a world so far removed from the brittle artifice of my son's life. I was reclaiming my time, my energy, my home, inch by steady inch. The spell was broken on a Friday afternoon by the shrill ring of the telephone. I saw the name flash on the small screen. Chloe and I felt a flicker, not of dread, but of detached curiosity. The first payment on their mortgage was not due for another week. They would not have discovered my silent transaction yet. So this call was something else. This was a new withdrawal from an account she did not realize was already closed. I let it ring 4 times, a small exercise in control. Before picking up the receiver, I said nothing, waiting for her to speak first. "Evelyn," she began, her voice brisk and devoid of any pleasantries. It was the tone of a busy executive addressing a subordinate. "I need you to be available on Sunday afternoon. My parents' flight from Boston lands at Cleveland Hopkins at 3 o'clock, and you'll need to be there to pick them up." She delivered the words not as a request, but as a set of instructions, a schedule I was expected to adhere to. I remained silent, letting her fill the void. She took this as acquiescence. "Our new SUV is at the dealership having a ceramic coat applied," she continued, the excuse itself a monument to her vanity, "and Daniel has a client meeting that he simply cannot miss. It's for that new commercial bid. Far too important." The lie was so flimsy, so self-serving, that it was almost artistic in its audacity. But it was her next words that truly laid her perception of me bare. "They will have quite a bit of luggage, at least 4 large suitcases. Your truck should be perfect for that. It has that big, open bed. Right? There it was. In her mind. I was no longer a mother, a grandmother, or even a family member. I was a service provider. I was a person with a truck, a functional object with a big, open bed, suitable for hauling things. As she spoke, a strange sense of composure washed over me. The last vestiges of personal hurt fell away, replaced by the detached fascination of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. This wasn't an insult, it was a diagnosis. I was witnessing a character flaw so profound, so deeply ingrained, that she was utterly blind to its existence. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was a thing to behold. She saw the world only through the lens of her own convenience, but and I was merely a tool to be utilized in the service of that convenience. Her demand was not an attack, it was a confirmation of everything I'd already concluded. My decision to cut the financial cord had been the correct one. This was just further documentation for a case that was already closed. I let a moment pass, long enough for her to wonder if the line had gone dead. Then, I allowed a hint of warmth to enter my voice, a placid tone designed to disarm any possible suspicion. Of course, Chloe, I can certainly help with that, I said smoothly. I could almost hear the satisfied little smirk on the other end of the line. I had played my part, the docile, helpful older woman. I had bowed to her authority. What is the flight number and airline? I asked, my voice a model of obliging pleasantry. I dutifully copied the information onto a notepad sitting by the phone. JetBlue. Flight 447, arriving at 3:05 p.m. I pictured the scene in my mind, her parents, whom I hadn't seen in 2 years, standing expectantly by the baggage claim, searching the crowd for the face of their personal chauffeur. Excellent, she said, her tone already dismissive, her mind moving on to her next task. They'll be at baggage claim carousel 3. And Evelyn, she added, a final twist of the knife. Do try to be on time. You know how impatient my father gets. She disconnected the call without a thank you, without a goodbye. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. I looked at the flight details I had written down, the neat, precise letters. A slow smile, the first genuine smile I had felt in a very long time, touched my lips. The trap was now set. The game had truly begun. Sunday arrived, draped in the cold, gray light of a Cleveland winter afternoon. The air had the damp, heavy feel of impending snow. It was the kind of day that made you want to stay indoors, surrounded by warmth and the solid comforts of home. Across town, I knew a scene of mild chaos was unfolding as a plane full of travelers descended toward the tarmac. But in my home, there was only peace. Instead of checking the time and preparing for a drive to the airport, I was in my workshop, the one space that felt like a seamless blend of my spirit and Robert's. The scent of sawdust and wood polish hung in the air, a perfume of creation. I was in the final stages of restoring a small walnut writing desk that had belonged to my own mother, a beautiful piece that had been scarred and neglected over the years. My work was methodical, a meditation in motion. My hands, which Chloe saw only as tools for lifting luggage, moved with a practiced, gentle skill, applying a final coat of beeswax and buffing the aged wood until it glowed with a deep, warm luster. I checked the old clock on the wall. It was 2:45 p.m., the time I would have needed to be leaving for the airport. At 3:05 p.m., the exact moment JetBlue Flight 447 was scheduled to touch down, I was carefully fitting a new felt lining into the main drawer. At 3:40 p.m., the time Mr. and Mrs. Harrison would likely be standing with their mountain of luggage at Carousel 3, I was making myself a cup of strong Earl Grey tea, the fragrant steam warming my face. I carried my tea into the living room and settled into Robert's armchair with a thick novel I had been meaning to read for the better part of a decade. The first buzz from my phone came at 3:52 p.m. It was a text message from Chloe. The preview on the screen, a single, impatient question. Are you there yet? I looked at the message, took a slow sip of my tea, and then placed the phone face down on the end table beside me. The buzzing was a distant, irrelevant noise, a fly bumping against a thick pane of glass, unable to penetrate the quiet sanctuary I had created. The calls began a few minutes later. Chloe, I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, Chloe again. A more frantic and insistent ringing this time. I ignored that one as well. A few minutes after that, a call from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I smiled to myself. That would be her parents. Borrowing a stranger's phone, their annoyance likely escalating into full-blown indignation. I let it ring and ring and ring. My thoughts were not with them. They were not on the inconvenience I was causing, or the frustration they must be feeling. My mind was on the book in my lap, on the satisfying restoration of the old desk, on the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I thought about the nature of reliability. For years, I had been utterly reliable for them, a constant, unending source of support, both financial and emotional. My reliability was a resource they had drawn from without thought, like drawing water from a bottomless well. They had never considered that the well might one day run dry, or more accurately, that the owner of the well might simply decide to put a lid on it. My actions today were not born of malice or a desire for petty revenge. They were a simple, direct consequence of their own behavior. I was operating according to my own value system now, a system built on mutual respect and earned trust, a currency in which they were utterly bankrupt. By 4:30 p.m., the calls had become a frantic, incessant buzzing. It was a tantrum in electronic form. I calmly stood up, walked over to the end table, and picked up my phone. I didn't silence it. I held the power button down until the screen went dark. The sudden, absolute silence that descended upon the room was beautiful. It was the silence of complete and total control. I went into the kitchen and made myself a simple dinner, the kind of comfort food I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy, without a tinge of guilt in years of thick, creamy tomato soup and a perfectly golden grilled cheese sandwich. As I ate, I looked out the window at the darkening sky. The first few flakes of snow were beginning to drift down, soft and white in the twilight. Somewhere across town, in a cold airport terminal or a drafty taxi queue, three people were learning a valuable lesson about assumptions. The thought didn't make me laugh. It didn't fill me with glee. It filled me with a deep and profound satisfaction, the same satisfaction a builder feels when a faulty, dangerous structure is finally, safely, and brought to the ground. The first invoice for their disrespect had just been delivered. The deep and profound satisfaction I felt after the airport incident did not fade. It settled into my bones, a quiet, reinforcing strength. The rest of the evening passed in a state of tranquil solitude. I finished my simple meal, loaded the dishes into the dishwasher, and returned to the living room with my book. Outside, the gentle snowfall had intensified, blanketing the world in a thick, sound-dampening layer of white. My house felt like a warm, safe cocoon, a fortress of peace against the winter storm. The silence was no longer a symbol of loneliness, but of sovereignty. It was a silence I had earned, a silence I now commanded. I was lost in the pages of my novel, the story a welcome escape, when the peace was violently shattered. It was not a knock. A knock is a request for entry. This was a pounding, a furious, percussive assault on my front door that rattled the old wood in its frame. Each blow was more aggressive than the last. A physical manifestation of pure, unadulterated rage. I felt no fear, no surprise, only a weary sense of inevitability. They had arrived. I calmly placed my silk bookmark between the pages of my novel, set my half-empty teacup on its saucer, and rose from my chair. My movements were unhurried as I walked to the door. Through the small peephole, the world outside was distorted into a grotesque fisheye lens. Three figures, huddled together on my small porch like wolves, their faces red and contorted with a mixture of cold and fury. It was Mr. Harrison, his wife, and Chloe. I took a deep, steadying breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. Before I could say a word, Mr. Harrison pushed past me, his expensive wool overcoat shedding melted snow onto my clean hardwood floor. He entered my home without invitation, his presence a violation. "What in God's name is the matter with you?" he shouted, his voice hoarse with anger. His face, normally a mask of placid self-importance, but was a blotchy, alarming shade of purple. "Do you have any earthly idea of the kind of humiliation you put us through? We waited at that godforsaken airport for nearly 3 hours." His wife, her normally perfect silver hair now disheveled and damp, followed him in, her lips pressed into a thin, venomous line. "This is utterly barbaric behavior." "Evelyn," she hissed, her voice dripping with a condescension that even her rage could not entirely mask. "To abandon elderly people in a place like that? We could have caught our death of cold. It's monstrous." Chloe brought up the rear, her designer coat wrinkled, her carefully applied makeup smeared beneath her eyes. Her voice was a shrill cry of indignation. "My parents had to take a $60 taxi in a blizzard because of you, because of your selfish, childish little game. Do you know how that makes us look?" I let their torrent of accusations wash over me, their rage a futile storm breaking against the seawall of my composure. I did not see three intimidating adults. I saw three spoiled, overgrown children, caught in the throes of a tantrum because a privilege they had taken for granted had been unexpectedly revoked. I clinically observed their state of disarray. I noted the irony of them complaining about a blizzard when the real storm was the one of their own making. A tempest of arrogance and disrespect that had been brewing for years. They were not angry because I'd inconvenienced them. They were furious because I had disobeyed them. I demonstrated that I was not, in fact, a tool to be used at their convenience. When their tirade finally ran out of steam, a tense, breathless silence filled the room. They stood there, chests heaving, staring at me, clearly expecting me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for their forgiveness. It was in that moment that I finally spoke. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the heavy air with the clean, sharp edge of tempered steel. "This is my house," I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn, "and I want you to leave, now." The effect was instantaneous. They were stunned into a momentary, collective paralysis, shocked by my utter lack of fear or contrition. Mr. Harrison was the first to recover, his face darkening even further. He took a step toward me, puffing out his chest in a sad, transparent display of intimidation. "You don't get to make demands here, old woman," he snarled. "Not after what you pulled. I have connections in this city, important people. You can't treat us this way and get away with it." His threat hung in the air, pathetic and hollow. I did not flinch. I simply moved to the door and held it open wider. And silent, unmovable command. Their blustering rage had no power here. This was my home, my foundation, and they were trespassing. Defeated. They filed out, their shoulders slumped, their parting shots nothing more than impotent whispers of fury. At the threshold, Mr. Harrison turned back, his eyes small and malevolent. "You will regret this," he promised. "You'll be reading about this. The whole city will know what kind of a monster you are." I said nothing. I simply closed the solid oak door behind them. And with a satisfying, definitive click, I turned the deadbolt. The house felt cleaner already. In the 2 days that followed the confrontation, a deceptive sense of normalcy returned. The memory of their impotent rage and hollow threats began to fade, replaced by the steady, quiet rhythm of my reclaimed life. I worked in my garden. I spoke with my sister, Carol, on the phone, and I made progress in the novel I was reading. The house was peaceful, a sanctuary once more. Mr. Harrison's parting threat seemed like nothing more than the last desperate gasp of a defeated bully. I had underestimated his vindictiveness. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying a second cup of coffee while scrolling through the local news on my tablet. I had a habit of reading the Cleveland Community Voice, a popular and widely read local blog that often covered neighborhood stories the main newspapers missed. I was casually scanning the headlines when a photograph made me freeze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. It was an old, unflattering picture of me, taken at a small business awards luncheon nearly a decade ago. Above it, a headline was emblazoned in a sensational font: Holiday Heartbreak, Local Senior Citizen Abandoned by Unstable Family Member at Airport Amidst Winter Storm Warning. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I read the first paragraph, then the second, my blood slowly turning to ice. The article was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction, skillfully woven from half-truths and outright lies. It quoted a Mr. Thomas Harrison, a respected retired banking executive, who recounted a harrowing tale of being left stranded for hours with his wife in frigid, blizzard-like conditions. The light snowfall from Sunday had been transformed into a dangerous, life-threatening winter storm. My decision not to answer my phone was not presented as a choice, but as a symptom of my increasingly erratic behavior and potential cognitive decline. The article was filled with quotes expressing their deep concern for my well-being, painting them as the loving, the worried family, and me as the cruel, unstable, and pitiable villain. I read the article again, this time with the cool, analytical eye of a business owner reviewing a fraudulent contract. I dissected each sentence, identifying the calculated distortions, the deliberate omissions. There was no mention of the Christmas dinner I was uninvited to, no context about their daughter's imperious demands, no hint of the years of financial support I had provided. It was a perfect, one-sided narrative designed for maximum reputational damage. It was character assassination, disguised as public concern. For a moment, I felt a grudging respect for my adversary. This was not just an angry rant. This was a strategic, calculated media placement. My business mind, long dormant in the fog of family drama, clicked into high gear. This attack had an architect. I scrolled to the bottom of the article and found the author's name, a woman I didn't recognize. I opened a new browser tab and began to work. I searched for the author's professional history. I searched for Mr. Harrison's board memberships and business associations from his time at the bank. I began to cross-reference names, looking for the connection, the weak point in their conspiracy. It took less than 20 minutes to find it. The editor of the Cleveland Community Voice blog served on the board of a small local charity, a charity where Mr. Harrison had been the treasurer for 5 years before his retirement. It wasn't a direct link, but it was a clear pathway of influence. The story had been planted. They had made a critical error in their arrogance, and they had escalated our private conflict into a public war. They had fired the first shot in a battle of narratives, assuming that their version, backed by their perceived social standing, would be the only one heard. They believed they could define me, label me as old, unstable, and cruel. They were wrong. By taking their lies public, they had given me an engraved invitation to respond with the truth. They wanted to weaponize words, but they had forgotten that I had spent a lifetime building things with more than just concrete and steel. I had built a reputation on facts, figures, and integrity. I set my tablet down on the kitchen table. The anger I felt was no longer the hot, personal sting of betrayal. It was a cold, clean, industrial fire. It was the fire of a furnace being lit, preparing to forge something new and strong. I walked to my study, to the same desk where I had canceled the mortgage payment. That had been an act of defense. What I was about to do now was different. This was the beginning of a counteroffensive. I powered on my laptop, the screen reflecting in my determined eyes. They had written a story about me. Now it was my turn to write the story of them. And my story, unlike theirs, would have the unshakable foundation of proof. My study, Robert's study, transformed from a sanctuary of memory into a command center. The days that followed the discovery of the slanderous blog post were not filled with grief or rage, but with a cold, methodical focus that I had not felt in years. It was the familiar mindset of preparing for a difficult job, of assessing a compromised structure and drawing up the plans for its demolition. The emotional, personal sting of betrayal had been cauterized by their public attack. What remained was the pragmatic mind of a business owner whose reputation, the cornerstone of the legacy Robert and I had built, was under assault. I was no longer a mother mourning a relationship. I was a strategist preparing for war. My first task was to gather the evidence, but to assemble an arsenal of undeniable fact. This was not a matter of emotion, but of documentation. I spent hours in the basement, pulling out heavy file boxes that had not been opened in years, the scent of aging paper filling the air. Inside were the meticulously organized records of my life, of my finances, of my generosity. I laid them out across the large oak desk bank statements from the past 4 years, each one showing the same automatic transfer of $2,500. Credit card statements detailing the purchases for their home, the high-end refrigerator Chloe had deemed essential, the custom-built shelving for Daniel's office. I found the thick packet of loan documents from when I had taken out a home equity loan against my own paid-off house to give them $50,000 for their down payment. Each piece of paper was a silent witness. I began to construct a master spreadsheet, my fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. The numbers grew, painting a stark, clinical picture of their dependency: $120,000 in direct mortgage support, $50,000 for the down payment. I added conservative estimates for the other large expenses I had covered: the new roof 2 summers ago, the full kitchen renovation when Chloe decided granite was the only acceptable countertop material. The grand total climbed, exceeding $200,000. It was a staggering sum, a number that represented the entirety of the retirement Robert and I had planned for ourselves. All of it poured into a foundation of ingratitude. The next phase of my operation was digital. I returned to the glossy, curated world of their social media, but this time, I was not a passive observer. I was a forensic accountant. I scrolled back through years of posts, my eyes scanning for dates and details. I became an archaeologist of their hypocrisy. Here was a photo of Chloe, posted in May, showing off a new diamond necklace with the caption, "Feeling so loved," I cross-referenced the date with my bank records. It was posted 3 days after I had transferred $6,000 to them to cover a surprise property tax bill they claimed they couldn't afford. I downloaded the image and made a note in the margin of my spreadsheet: my contribution $6,000 for property taxes. My investigation then turned to Mr. Thomas Harrison. His public attack required a specific response, using public records databases and online business registries. I dug into his much-vaunted consulting firm. It took only a few hours to confirm what I suspected. The firm was a ghost, a shell company with a mailing address at a UPS store and a dormant website. Further searches revealed 2 significant liens against his own property for unpaid taxes. The man who presented himself as a pillar of the financial community, who looked down on me for my blue-collar life, was a fraud, drowning in debt and desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth. His snobbery was not just a character flaw, it was a survival tactic. This information was crucial. It provided motive. With all my research complete, it was time to assemble the weapons. I spent an entire afternoon printing, collating, and organizing. The hum of my laser printer was the only sound in the quiet house. I printed the master spreadsheet, the highlighted bank statements, the damning social media posts, and the public records of Mr. Harrison's financial troubles. On top of each stack, I placed a printed copy of the slanderous blog article, its lies now looking flimsy and pathetic in the face of the mountain of evidence beneath it. According to a recent post by Chloe Beyond, excited to host our 12 favorite people for our annual Christmas Eve dinner, I knew my target audience size. I made 13 identical packets, each one bound with a heavy-duty staple. The final step was to place each dossier into a clean, professional-looking manila envelope. The process was a calm, deliberate ritual. I was not just compiling papers, I was building a case. I was preparing for court, and the dining room of my son's house would be my courtroom. Christmas Eve arrived with a cold, crystalline clarity. The sky was a deep, star-dusted blue, and the fresh snow from the previous days glittered under the streetlights. I did not dress for a holiday celebration. I dressed for a board meeting where a hostile takeover was on the agenda. I chose a charcoal gray wool suit, impeccably tailored, paired with a simple silk blouse. It was my armor, a uniform of quiet authority that I had not worn in years, carrying a worn leather briefcase containing the 13 manila envelopes. I drove through the silent, festive streets towards Westwood Heights. The neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights, each house a warm beacon of family and cheer, a world away from the cold purpose of my mission. I parked across the street from my son's house and watched. Cars lined the curb, expensive German sedans and luxury SUVs. Through the large picture window, I could see the silhouettes of people moving, laughing, their wine glasses catching the light. I checked my watch, 7:15 p.m. Perfect. They would be seated, settled, the main course likely on its way. There would be no easy escape. I walked up the shoveled pathway, my heels making a quiet, determined sound on the cold stone. As I had expected, the front door was unlocked. It was the kind of casual arrogance that defined them, a belief that they were insulated from the unpleasantness of the world. I let myself in, the wave of warm air and the sound of their conviviality washing over me. I walked directly towards the dining room. As I stepped through the arched entryway, the cheerful chatter faltered and then died completely. 12 pairs of eyes turned towards me. I saw the progression of expressions on their faces: confusion, surprise, and then, on the faces of my family, pure, unadulterated horror. Daniel went pale, his fork clattering onto his plate. Chloe froze, her wineglass halfway to her perfectly painted lips. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison looked as if they had seen a ghost. I took a moment to scan the faces of the other guests, the 12 favorite people, all of them dressed in their holiday finery, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Chloe was the first to find her voice, and her recovery swift and sharp. "Evelyn," she snapped, her voice low and furious. "This is a private party. You need to leave. Immediately." I ignored her completely. I walked calmly to the ornate marble sideboard at the end of the room, a piece I remembered paying for, and placed my leather briefcase upon it. I turned to face the stunned assembly. "Good evening, everyone. I do apologize for the interruption." I began, my voice even and clear, carrying easily through the silent room. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I am Daniel's mother. And since my money paid for this house, the furniture you're sitting on, and the food on your plates, I felt I had a right to attend." A collective gasp went through the room. I opened my briefcase and took out the thick stack of manila envelopes. I began to move around the long dining table, my steps measured and deliberate. In front of each guest, I placed an envelope. My daughter-in-law and my son may have forgotten to mention that for the past 4 years. I have been their primary source of financial support. I continued conversationally. "I thought you, as their closest friends, deserve to have the full context. You will find all the relevant documentation in those packets." The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper as 12 people began to examine the evidence. I watched their faces, a fascinating study in human reaction. I saw eyebrows raise at the spreadsheet summarizing the costs. I saw eyes widen at the highlighted bank statements. I saw people glance from the photographs of Chloe's jewelry on social media down to the actual jewelry she was wearing. The atmosphere in the room was shifting like tectonic plates, the warmth of the party rapidly chilling into a mortified frost. A well-dressed man whom I recognized as my friend, Frank, looked up from a credit card statement, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked directly at Chloe. "Chloe," he said, his voice firm. "What is this?" "Mr. Harrison, red-faced and sputtering, tried to seize control. This is nonsense. My daughter-in-law has explained this to me. Evelyn has been having difficulties. The blog post, I'm sure you all read about her unfortunate episode at the airport. It was the opening I had been waiting for. Ah, yes, the blog post. I said, my voice cutting him off cleanly. Let's talk about that. You'll find on page 12 of your packets the public records detailing Mr. Harrison's own financial difficulties, as well as his connection to the editor of that blog. The blizzard he described, as you all know, was a light dusting of snow. The room fell into an even deeper, more profound silence. The guests were no longer just looking at the financial evidence. They were realizing they had been manipulated, used as pawns in a public smear campaign. It was in that moment of absolute stillness that Chloe finally broke. She turned to my son, her face a mask of fury. "Daniel," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do something. Are you going to let her do this to us? To my parents? Tell her to leave. It's her or me. Daniel, choose." All eyes swiveled to my son. He sat frozen in his chair, his face ashen, his gaze fixed on his plate. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. His silence was his choice. It was the loudest confession I had ever heard. I had done what I came to do. The truth was now in their hands. I picked up my empty briefcase from the sideboard. I simply wanted you all to have the complete story. I said to the room at large, "Now you do. Please, enjoy the rest of your dinner." I paused, letting my gaze rest on Daniel and Chloe for one final moment. It's the last one I'll be paying for. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my back straight, my head held high. As I reached the front door, the eruption began behind me. Voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the ugly, discordant sound of a carefully constructed world of lies falling to pieces. It was the most beautiful Christmas music I had ever heard. The winter that had held Cleveland in its icy grip finally gave way to the tentative warmth of spring. The heavy snow melted, feeding the dormant earth, and the first green shoots of crocuses began to push their way through the cold soil. My life had found a similar thaw. The silence in my home was no longer a strategic defense, but a comfortable chosen peace. I reconnected with my sister, Carol, and spent my days reading and gardening, rediscovering the simple rhythms of a life lived for oneself. The dramatic fallout from that Christmas Eve dinner reached me only in quiet whispers. The Harrisons' social standing had evaporated, and Chloe and Daniel's circle of friends had vanished. I took no joy in this news, only a detached acknowledgement that consequences, like gravity, are a relentless force. The official confirmation arrived one morning in late March, a certified letter, its formal, legalistic weight, a stark contrast to the bright spring day, brought a notice of default. 3 months of missed mortgage payments had finally caught up with them. The letter stated they had 14 days to bring the account current, or foreclosure proceedings would begin on the house my money had built. I laid the letter on my kitchen table. It was not my problem anymore. It was simply the final, documented proof of a bankruptcy that had begun long before the payments ever stopped. A few days later, a hesitant, timid rap came at my door. I had been expecting it. It was my son, Daniel. The man before me was a ghost of his former self, his expensive suit hanging on him like a borrowed costume, and dark, hollowed-out circles ringed his eyes. He looked thoroughly broken. "Mom," he whispered, "can I come in?" Inside, he looked at the new armchair and fresh paint. Small things I could now afford. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice cracking as he finally met my gaze. "God, Mom, I am so sorry. For everything, for Christmas, for the way I let Chloe and her parents treat you, for being so weak." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "Chloe left me about a month ago, after the money ran out and our friends disappeared." He sank onto the sofa. The picture of defeat. "The house is in foreclosure," he said, the words heavy with shame. "I'm going to lose it all." He looked at me with a desperate, childish hope, the same look he'd given me as a boy when he had broken something of value. I don't know what to do, he whispered. Can you help me? Just one last time? I listened to his confession without interruption, a deep, sorrowful pity welling up inside me, not for his circumstances, but for the man he had allowed himself to become. The anger I had once felt was long gone, burned away and leaving only the sad ashes of what might have been. I sat opposite him. I forgave you months ago. Daniel, I said, my voice gentle but firm. But forgiveness doesn't erase the choices you made. You are a grown man. The consequences of your choices are your own to bear. I will not pay for them any longer. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by the stark understanding of his reality. Daniel left that evening a changed man, the false bravado and entitlement stripped away. I didn't know if he would succeed, but his journey was no longer mine to fund. Closing the door, I felt a profound sense of closure. The war was over. The case was closed. But a new question remained: what now? In the weeks that followed, I thought a great deal about Robert and the legacy we built. It was never just about profit margins. It was about creating things of value, things that were strong and useful. It was about building foundations, both literal and metaphorical, upon which other people could build their lives. I looked at my own bank balance and realized the money was a tool, only as good as the purpose for which it is used. I knew then what I had to do. The final scene of this chapter took place not in my home, but at the local community college's bustling Applied Trades and Technology Center. The air smelled of hot metal and possibility. I was there to meet the dean, holding documents for a new endowment, signing the final papers. I felt a purpose deeper and more satisfying than any victory. I had officially created the Robert and Evelyn Reed Memorial Scholarship, a full-ride scholarship for a promising student entering the skilled trades. As I pushed the signed papers across the desk, I knew I had found the best use for the money. It would no longer fund a life of empty surfaces, but instead become a new foundation for a new generation of builders who understood the value of honest work. I had taken the currency of my pain and transformed it into a legacy of kindness. Leaving the college, I felt a profound peace. I had not only reclaimed my life, I had given it a new, more meaningful foundation. Robert, I knew, would be proud.